Good morning, good evening, good night, NBN, Entrepreneurship and Leadership.
Personally, I'm fascinated by the story.
Trust is an underrated weapon in the business landscape.
I'm a really strong believer in learning by doing.
What's the definition of success?
You're trying to come up with an answer to the question. But go ahead, Richard.
You could be right, but you're wrong. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good night, whatever time of the day it is. Entrepreneurship and Leadership channel on the NBN listeners. Today we've got a very special guest, Renato Beninatto. Renato, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Well, I'll start with the things that are controversial. Because one of the hardest questions that people tend to ask me is, where am I from? And I have three citizenships. I was born in Brazil, and I consider myself a Brazilian. I have Italian citizenship because my great-grandparents moved from Italy to Brazil in the 1800s. And I have been living in the United States for 20 years, and I have acquired American citizenship living here. I have been working since I started my first company at the age of 23. I started a translation company in Brazil. And so it's been almost 40 years in the language services businesses. I have started 5 companies, and I have worked as an executive in 4 other companies.
So you've been busy.
Well, I haven't been unemployed. That's one of the advantages of being an entrepreneur, is that you're never unemployed.
If you, in order to decide who you really are, so I have a little test to determine who you really are. When Brazil and Italy play in the World Cup final, who are you rooting for?
They did in 1970, and Italy eliminated Brazil in 1982, so I'm Brazilian.
Exactly.
Through and through.
So you're Brazilian. That's what I thought. You're Brazilian. And you know, America's, I guess you're adopted, and they're the least good at football, soccer. So
exactly. So when it comes to that test, it's for sure Brazil. And I enjoy the benefit of being 9 times world champion.
Yes,
5
exactly.
for Brazil.
It's always good to associate yourself with winners.
Yes.
And Brazil is a big winner when it comes to football.
Yes. So you said you started your first company when you were 23. When you were growing up, did you know you wanted to have a business? Did you have like entrepreneurs in your family, or was it a surprise? Was it what led you to take that decision to go your own way rather than or what was normal for people when you were growing up?
Well, my journey is an interesting one, because my father was the son of a shoemaker, of a cobbler in a small town in Brazil. And small town in Brazil has 500,000 inhabitants. But, so
a village, a Brazilian village.
Yeah. So he was. He worked for the Brazilian National Bank, Banco do Brasil. He made a career in the bank, and eventually was sent abroad. So since I was born, since I was 1 year old, we moved. I lived in Argentina, Paraguay, and then a few years back in Brazil, then Italy, Portugal, Luxembourg. So, and the United States in New York. So from 1 to 19 years old, I was moving constantly every 3 years. And my father was an employee, a civil servant, a person who had a job, and instilled in all of us in the family this idea of having a job, having a career, a safe job as a civil servant, with a pension, with all those benefits. And this is what my mother also wanted us to do. I'm the oldest of 4 brothers. And my father died when I was 18 years old. And we moved back to Brazil. I started teaching English. It was my first job. And because of that, somebody asked me to do translations, and I started doing translations.
Did you go to university, Renato, in this?
I did. I worked and I went to university, but I studied business and first economics and then business. Actually, my goal, what I wanted to be, was to be a diplomat, because traveling, living in different countries, my schoolmates, my friends were all children of diplomats, and that's the path that I wanted to follow in this concept of being an employee, of being following a career, and it was a way that I thought could reconcile the opportunity to change countries, move abroad, and travel, and the glamour of a well-paying job. Right?
So you were going against a bit what your family were expecting of you, like and your own expectation to be a diplomat and work in translation. They aren't the same thing at all. So was there like a moment when you suddenly figured out that this might actually be a better route for you, and how did you come to that? Because this sounds like a fairly important step in your life, given what happened later.
Yeah. And what happened was that I was 23. I had been a freelancer for 4 years, working as a freelance translator. I was married. I married when I was 21. My ex-wife was my partner, and she did typing jobs at home. This is pre-computer
like transcription
era.
or just like
but she actually did transcription for a translator, which it's another rabbit hole there. But so when I was 23, I realized that if I continued working the way I was working, that was going to be my lifestyle for the rest of my life, because I couldn't work any more hours than I worked. I went to school, I had a job, and I did freelance translation. If I did only freelance translation, 10 hours a day, that was going to be my income. And I said, this is not the lifestyle that I want. This is not how I can continue. So I started in a very rudimentary way, outsourcing some of my work and making a margin there. I was in a profession that is essentially, at the time and at the level that I was, it wasn't even an industry, it was a craft. So there were this rules of ethics, and you weren't supposed to charge more than 20% or make more than 20% commission on the work of others, and so on. And I didn't have a lot of entrepreneurial experience. So I had to learn by myself through my clients. One of the lucky breaks that I had is through connections and relationships. I started to do translations for the biggest Brazilian construction company and for Shell Oil, which was the biggest private company in Brazil at that time. And one of the areas where I ended was translating training materials for the management training program at Shell Oil.
How did you get to that? I mean, so you're just some kid.
Luck.
Like, how did
luck.
you? No.
Luck.
I mean,
luck, connections. I mean,
like, but do you talk to the connections? Just, hey, connection, introduce me to another person.
No. It's not like that. It's my brother worked, got an internship. My younger brother, all my brothers are younger. He got an internship at Shell, and he started dating somebody in the human resources department.
Okay.
He needed translation for this course that they were going to give to their managers, and a conversation. Oh, do you know anybody who can do translation? Oh, my brother does translation. I actually say that I got into translation totally by chance, because there was a film festival. There is still a film festival in Rio de Janeiro, and in 1982, just 2 weeks before the festival, the Italian translator, the guy who did translations from Italian into Portuguese for the Italian movies died, and they didn't have anybody to do the translations last minute, and so through connections, somebody asked my other brother, do you know anybody who does translation? Oh, you speak 5 languages. Can you do this translation for us? I said, no, I don't do translation. My brother likes that stuff. So I got into translating movies back in the time that you used the typewriter, you worked on film, you had actually to burn the subtitles on the film. And I think that those are the things that you can't plan, Richard. It's the lucky breaks that you get, the opportunity.
But you have to take them when they come. But I mean, that's really interesting. But was there a moment, like you mentioned the financial motivation, you realized that if you were just selling your time, selling your services, you could never get beyond a certain level. So you started outsourcing. But was it when you were with Shell or with the other company, the construction company, did you suddenly think, this could actually turn into quite a big business? Was there a moment where you sort of suddenly saw, this is a bigger opportunity than just making a bit of extra money? There wasn't a moment, a light bulb moment, no?
No, it took me probably 18 years to realize that I was creating value.
18 years.
Yes, and I'll tell you why.
I know you weren't living in Brazil for all those years. So
No, I was. It was there after the 18 years that I went out of Brazil. But I'll tell you why it took me 18 years. In the beginning, and this is very typical of small businesses, I was reacting. I was taking what came to me. I was 23 years old when I started. What did I know about the world? I actually quit. You asked me if I went to college. I quit. I dropped out of college in the last semester because there were no cell phones, no internet. I had to drive across town. It took me 45 minutes to an hour to go from my English classes at 6 p.m. My classes started at 7 p.m. I would drive across town, arrive at the university. Oh, no class today. The teachers or the professors or the staff is on strike, or the professor didn't show up today, no class. And after a while, you have a job, you're doing freelance work, you have a family, and still going to college. I said, I will suspend my registration, my school, and I'll come back.
Yeah.
Never did, right?
So you don't actually have a degree?
No, not a formal degree. And this is the interesting thing, because today I teach at 3 universities and I don't have a degree. But that's an interesting side conversation. I'll come back to the other one. Is that a big frustration that I had, and I had these conversations with fellow entrepreneurs, that because you dropped out and you don't have a traditional career with promotions and things like that, you get distracted and you get frustrated and you have this inferiority feeling that you didn't achieve a degree or something like that. So when I moved to New York and I was a VP at a very big publicly traded company, I tried to negotiate an MBA with with the CEO of the company, and he said, "Why? I mean, you are an executive in the biggest company in your industry. Why do you want a degree? You didn't want to get here. You didn't need one to get here." But the interesting, there were 2 things that took away my frustration with not having a degree. One was that I needed to get an equivalency of my education for visa purposes here in the United States. And according to the immigration service in the United States, every 2 years that you spend as a senior executive in a company count like 1 semester in college. So 18 years as a business owner counted essentially like
an education,
a 4.5, a full education. The other thing that changed my perception about education was when I read um, a data point that the key indicator of success is not the degree, the university from where you get your degree. It's not finishing university, is being accepted to the university. So Zuckerberg and Bill Gates, they never finished the university. The fact that they were accepted at prestigious universities was the key indicator of success.
Okay.
I was accepted at Cambridge University in the UK when I was 18. I could have gone and studied there. I was accepted at PUC. I went to the best university in Rio de Janeiro. So those milestones were, that milestone is the most important one. It's not finishing the university, it's getting in. After that,
Renato, I would assume that if you had to, this is something that we talk about, Richard and I also go back and forth on. Richard comes from actually Cambridge University, and his father was an Oxford professor. And we have, so from your perspective, how important, let's say for young people, I mean, like how important is the, like, which would you rather have, an education or would you rather have experience? Like what's your...
I think okay, this is a conversation that I've had a few times, even with my kids, is that the university tries to teach and codify the experience that people like us have gained, right? What you're taught is a system of knowledge, a structure of knowledge that was acquired by people who have done things. It's not by people who have studied things, it's people who have done things. And those things that have been done become structure, become a code, a codified approach to knowledge, and that is what is taught at the university. So I believe, and my brothers make fun of me. It's funny, I'm mentioning my brothers a lot, and
they're obviously probably instrumental to all your breaks.
Absolutely, because one of the things that I've learned also, like that thing about entering the university, is that the longest relationship that you have in your life is with your siblings, right? Because your parents die, your children survive you, they come later in your life. Your spouse comes into your life when you are an adult, and the longest relationship that you have since you start living until you die, the people who are closer to you are your siblings, and they are your test environment, they are your trust environment, and so on. So and we are 4 brothers, we live in 4 different countries, and we are in constant communication. But there is this challenge, right? We are 4, 2 of us have professional careers in companies as executives in companies, and 2 of us are entrepreneurs and business owners and so on. So, but what they used to make fun of me and challenge me in the beginning was that I had all these ideas. I was the idea guy. Oh, I'm going to make money doing this stuff. Oh, let's copy this idea and bring it to Brazil and let's make it big. And I always have this
So
big ideas.
what stage in your life was that? You said that you didn't think of business earlier. So was that later when you had the translation business? Or?
No, throughout the process. After I established my business, and going back to that line of thought, it took me a while. I learned a lot through the translations that I accepted, right? One interesting thing about translation is that you're forced to read what you're translating. And because of the niche where I ended up, which was essentially training and education and management training, I learned a lot about management structure. Oh, and there is a parenthesis. There was a period while I had my business that I took a job at Arthur Andersen as a trainee. I applied for a job. I had this idea that it would be great to have a job at an interesting company. And I almost forgot about this, but I spent a year and a half being a tax consultant at
What did you do with your translation business?
My wife, who had a job before. She quit her job and she continued with the business. Okay. And I took this job that didn't make any money at Arthur Andersen. And I must say, Arthur Andersen and most of these consulting companies, they have the same onboarding approach. They put 100 young men and very few women at the time, maybe 3 women, in a hotel room and taught us everything about accounting, audit, and business processes, and before you could go to the market. I was part of a small group among this 100. There were 6 of us that were put into a new business line at Arthur Andersen at the time in Brazil, which was their tax consulting business. So I had an extra 2 weeks of training on taxation. That was my education, really.
Yeah, that sounds like a high level.
Yeah.
Renato, I have to ask you though, because like I know this because I know you and I've heard this story, but you have to share it with the listeners. Because like you're talking about very formal things, but I like for me, you've always been also sort of guerrilla style, like do things shoestring style, and you're sort of like this refined, experienced business guy. But I like to go to the start, and I like the story about how you landed. I think it was $1 million account, you know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about. It's very funny because one day, and this is where relationships and participation in groups is very important. I have been very involved in associations from the beginning, right, of my career. So I was part of the Brazilian Translators Association. One day, one guy from Ireland calls the Brazilian Translators Association and says, "Oh, what is the biggest translation company in Rio de Janeiro?" And the secretary of the association says, "I cannot give you that information. This is a professional association. I cannot help you with that." So next day he gets his wife to call in and say, "I'm a translator. I'm moving back to Brazil. Are there any members of the association that own translation companies?" And the assistant says, "Oh, Renato Beninatto. I was the guy who brought chocolate and flowers and things for the meeting. So top of mind, she remembered me." So this guy calls me and says, "Hey, do you do localization?" And I go, "What the hell is localization? I have no idea of what it is." And for our listeners, localization is translating software, basically, right? And I said, "Sure. What do you need? Tell me more." And the guy explained what localization was, and I went to Dublin 3 days later, and we started doing localization. But this is not the story that you were asking me about. That's not the $1 million story. This is how it's essentially, and from an entrepreneurial perspective, is never say no, right? Say yes. Give me more. Tell me more. If you don't know what the prospect is talking about, tell me more. This is a fantastic line to learn. Tell me more, and let them buy from you instead of you selling to them. But what I got a call, this was a really fun one. I got a call from a guy that I met at a conference at the ATA conference in the United States. I had my office in Brazil, and the guy calls me and says, "Hey, Renato, we've been working with you for a couple of years. We're very happy with the quality of your services. Do you do Spanish?" And I said, "Oh my God, another American that doesn't know that we don't speak Spanish in Brazil."
In South America.
But I shut up and say, "Tell me more. What do you need?" "Oh, no, we have this project and it's quite big, but we need to have a very good price for translation. Do you do Spanish?" And I said, "How big is the project?" It says, 8 million words. I do a quick calculation and say, "Well, that's about $1 million. Of course we do Spanish." And hang up. I call 3 people, and one in Chile, one in Colombia, and one in Argentina. And again, here a lesson on sexism and not really checking your biases, I called two guys, one in Chile and one in Colombia, and said, I need to hire 25 people in 1 week to start working on this project. Can you do that? Oh, no, it's impossible. I don't know 25 translators and so on. I called this young woman in Argentina that I had met at another conference, and she says, sure, I'm coming to Rio tomorrow. So she comes to Rio. We set up this organization. Long story short, within a month, we had 25. We had 100 candidates for the position.
Wait, Renato, there's more. Are you going to get to the part where there's the visit to the school? Isn't there a visit to the school?
This is
You're missing the best bits.
The best part is that the client wants to see our office.
Exactly.
And we don't have an office. So
these are the moments that entrepreneurs remember.
Yes. So we don't have an office. We don't even have a company yet in Argentina. Right?
Exactly.
So I tell my partner, what can we do? And she says, I have a client who has a computer school, and it just happens that is school vacation. So the building is empty. I can ask him to lend us a room. So, and by the way, parenthesis, this guy works for her today, right? He is her employee today. So we go to this beautiful house in downtown Rosario in Argentina, and he gives us like a closet almost. It's a small room, empty room that is available on the attic of his office. And we go there and we set up an office with computers. There are not enough outlets for us to plug in all the computers. We put a phone. She invites two of her translator friends to come in and to fake that we're translating there. So the client walks in, and as he walks into the school, he sees on the right side a room with 20 computers. On the left side, another room with 20 computers. This is CRT, cathode ray tubes, big PCs. And we walk upstairs and we go to our office and we sit and we had a conversation. And the guy said, well, this is fantastic. We can put people working in this room. We can train them in Trados, which was the translation memory at the time. And the first impression was what sold the project. He was going to visit two other companies, and he said, no, we're going with you. And next thing, we had boxes and boxes and boxes of manuals to translate. It was a combined cycle turbine that was sold to Mexico by GE, and we had to translate all the assembly and training manuals for that. An amazing project. It took us 8 months to finish the project.
I love that story.
That was fun. I bought a new car. I bought a new apartment.
but I'm still going to drill down a bit into sort of like at what stage, because you're clearly at the stage you tell that story, you are being very entrepreneurial. Earlier, you were a translator who took on a few extra projects, and I'm just like, can you like fish out? Was there because once you did the $1 million calculation, there must have been a moment when you thought, this is a bigger deal. I can get rich. I can make serious money out of this. And I'm just wondering, when was that?
It's a little trip down memory lane here. Now that we're having this conversation, I'm going back. There were a few instances where I was approached. I didn't have sales. I was approached for projects that were bigger than what I could handle. And I had to build teams of translators, and I started hiring and so on. So the first step was to rent an office, right? So it's funny because I'm talking to investors these days and private equity, and they talk about what is your business thesis, right? So I didn't know this language. My business thesis in 1983 was that there must be a demand for emergency typing services, because I had invested in buying 3 electric typewriters. And so I rented an office 3 blocks from the Rio de Janeiro courts. right? So our thesis was that there would be this bunch of people that needed rush jobs, and we would be there. We would charge a ton of money for typing petitions and things like that. I didn't do market research. There was a service inside the courthouse that offered that service already, but we called our company because my wife is the fastest typist you've ever seen, and her brother was also amazing, and I was good, but not as fast as they were. So my first company was called Transtype, Translation and Typing. And we thought our thesis that was typing was going to be the big thing, and we would do translation on the side. And within 3 months, we had to expand our office. We had to rent the office next door because the demand for translation was much higher. As we move forward, I read a book called, and you mentioned this word before, Kimon, Guerrilla. I read a book by Jay
Levinson.
Levinson, Guerrilla Marketing, back in the 80s. And I basically memorized that book. It's a brilliant book, and I still use a lot of those theories and techniques. So what I did, I teamed up with two other translators in a work group at the Brazilian Translators Association. Two translators that were more technology driven. And one of them, an older person, he was 50 years old. He was really old. I was in my 20s. And we started discussing where is the money in the translation business. And the three of us started talking, and we realized that there was a lot of translated books in the Brazilian market. So we needed to figure out how the translation process happened. And we went and we dissected the book translation market, and we identified that a lot more money was spent in proofreading and typesetting the book than actually translating the book. The cost of translation was something like 20% of the cost of the production of the book. So this guy, who was not an entrepreneur, he was just a smart guy, said we should figure out how to get this whole take care of the whole process. So we figured out a process where we would translate, proofread, and typeset the book and sell the whole thing in a shorter period of time to the publishing house. And once we figured that out, we bought one computer that we did time sharing. From 6 a.m. to noon, it was one of the translators. From noon to 6 p.m., it was me. From 6 p.m. to midnight, it was the other translator that owned the computer. My first investment eventually was to buy the whole computer, buy them out, right? $3,000 was the cost of a computer, which was a fortune for us.
It's crazy. It's a lot today.
Yeah. And then, and you have the import tariffs and all this stuff. Yeah. So at one point, I wrote 8 letters to publishers in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. And the 8 of them responded. But one was a publisher who published, how do you call this, Panini, like Panini, the football stickers and things that you collect, that kids collect. And they had bought the rights to translate Fodor's travel guides into Portuguese. So the publisher calls me and said, I have 18 guides that I need translated in 1 year. Can you do this with your process, with typesetting, proofreading, typesetting. You give me, we promise to deliver the film that they can go straight to offset printing. I'm talking this early 90s. I went from 4 or 5 employees to 26 employees. I rented a whole floor. I had one office in 10 office per floor building, and I rented a whole floor. I bought 8 computers. I hired typesetters that worked during the night in a newspaper, and they worked 4 hours doing typesetting for us. So I put in a whole operation, and this was the biggest opportunity that I had at the time, but also my biggest failure, my biggest lesson learned in the process, because I put all the eggs in one basket. This was 90% of my business was in the hands of one customer. Brazil was going through hyperinflation, and at the beginning of this process, that had been a government plan to stabilize the economy. So you were forbidden to increase prices, and inflation came back, and inflation over a period of 8 months was over 100%. So I started losing money. My customer went bankrupt in the process because of the price freezing. And I had to fire 26 people. I had to break my lease, and I went to my landlord. I was crying. I say, hey, please forgive. I had to pay like 3 months rent, and I couldn't. I didn't have the money. And they sued me anyway for the money. It's like, when you're down,
right, you get kicked some more.
Exactly. So it was an amazing, frustrating, terrible experience. My wife went back to the market, got a job. I had to reorganize the company, and we made a pact that we would never ever leave any of our clients have more than 30% of our revenue.
Right. So Renato, where does this fit into the timeline of that $1 million thing? Was that before?
This was before. This is before.
Okay, so then you did the $1 million thing, but I'm kind of curious to just move now past Brazil, like, so, because you have so much of a long career. I mean, so how did you ever get out? Did you sell your company? How did you get out of Brazil? And then what happened after that?
Well, very good. So this opportunity, I started going to conferences internationally, right? So
can you just put a date on this, Renato? Whereabouts are we in what
we're
decade?
talking about 1995.
Okay.
Right. So 1995, I am established. I have started in 1992. I started going to conferences outside of Brazil. Before 1992, it was very hard to travel. You had restrictions. You needed to lend money to the government. There was this mandatory loan that you had to give the government $2,000 to be able to get a visa. It was very hard to travel outside. There was a little window, and I was able in 1992 to go to conferences in the United States and Europe. And I met when I went to Ireland, working for that guy who called me and asked, do you do localization? I met the first large translation companies that did multiple languages in the world. And they invited me to LISA, which was an association of standards. And they had 2 events per year all over the world. So I started going to these events. And at that moment, I became the Brazil guy. I was the only one from Brazil going to these events. So clients started calling me. So around 1995, 96, I already had clients in 12 countries, final clients, large companies, Hewlett Packard, Polar from Finland, doing watches. I had Novell, and I had other translation companies buying my services. And this is where I got the call to do Spanish. I go to Argentina. I set an office in Argentina. I go from 20 employees in Brazil to a total of close to 50 between Brazil and Argentina. I bring people from Brazil to train people in Argentina because there wasn't a professional environment. The internet was just starting in Argentina. My partner was the first individual in her town to have an email address, right? So we set up the infrastructure. We do all that stuff, and I continue going internationally. Now I'm selling Portuguese and Spanish, doing Latin American translations, and I start meeting business owners. And two companies, first one company approaches me and say, hey, it's a company in Chicago, we have some extra money, we want to buy your company. I said, you want to buy my company? Why? How much? And the guy says, my company made about $2 million, $1.5 million a year. So it was a lot of money. And I had SAP spending $700,000 a year with me. It was a great client base. And he says, I'll give you $500,000. I said, $500,000. It's just like that guy, the mini-me guy was
Right, I know. It's Austin Powers, but I don't know.
Austin Powers, $1 million, right? So I said $500,000. I talked to my wife, and I said, "Wow, this is a great idea," and we go through the process, and as we're going through this process, I had been to another conference, and there was another guy who was an investor, and he wanted to buy my company, and literally last minute, the night before I signed the papers to sell my company, I called this guy and I say, well, we're about to sign, but you said you were interested in the company. How much do you think my company is worth? So he asked some questions and he said, well, considering what you're telling me, I would pay $1.5 million for your company. I say, from 500 to 1.5. I didn't know I had this amount of money.
You had no idea. It's so funny what you do now.
And by the way, part of this is we want to educate people. Like everyone who makes it in business in different degrees, there's a time in your life when you didn't know things, and it's just and so if you're listening to this and saying, "Wow, isn't it incredible he didn't know that I came on all entrepreneurs." There were stages where you didn't know stuff that later seems obvious, and the great thing about the internet is it's so much easier to educate yourself these days than it was back then.
You didn't have that before.
But the most ironic thing, you know what's so ironic, is that Renato today, and we'll eventually get to that, one of the things he does is he helps broker, buys and sells companies. Yes. So he knows better than anybody else what the value of a company is.
You become an expert in the thing you were ignorant of.
I was so ignorant. And today, I mean, I gave it away. I should have sold.
So my did company you in the end sell it for 1.5 or 500?
1.5. The other guy said, "Well, this is it was his first offer," and I said yes. And exactly. I said, well, but I have some penalties because we're ready to sign the agreement with this company. We'll pay all the penalties. Yeah, no problem.
Next Renato, day, he was on a plane. You know the market, so you can give us, this is a nice little education, as Richard said. How do selling companies of this size work, and what should you have gotten for your business? What did you get? What should you have gotten? And
yes. Okay. So one of the things that I've learned over this period and over many transactions now, is that the value of your company is in a service business, not in a technology business. There are different ways for you to evaluate the value of the company, but in a service business, it's a multiple of your EBITDA, of your profit, right? So for business services in general, it's something between, depending on the size of the company, there are little, if you are between less than $5 million in revenue, it's between 3 and 5 times your profit. If you are over $5 million, it could be up to 7 times your profit. If you are over $10 million, you can have better conversations. But I would say if you have more than $10 million in profit, not $10 million in revenue,
Right.
if you have more than $10 million in cash, free cash in your company that you're generating, you can get better multipliers, right? But the key information is that it's a multiplier of your profit.
Right.
And the calculation that an investor makes is that how much time is it going to take me to make this money back? So if I do 5 times profit, it's going to take me 5 years. If I do 7 times profit, it's going to take me 7 years, right? That's the metric. That's the calculation.
And so in your case, with this 1.5 million, what should you?
I gave my company away because 1.5 million was my revenue. So I was making probably 60% profit. I was a very profitable company.
Wow.
Yeah, because I was charging my clients in hard currency, in dollars, and I was keeping my dollars in the United States, and I was paying my employees in local currency, in Brazilian, whatever the currency was, because over a period of 10 years, we changed currency 6 times in Brazil because of inflation. And Argentina, that also changed currency 3 times. So I was paying salaries. So I had my local expenses paid with my local clients, and I had my profit stashed away in dollars in a bank in New York that I didn't have to pay taxes on until at that time I repatriated that money. And because I had worked as a tax consultant, I knew this.
You knew all the tricks.
Well.
Exactly.
Yes.
Now we come full circle.
Yeah. Just imagine who might be listening, Renato. Be careful.
Well, the law changed. Now it's very transparent. Everything is visible. So I wasn't doing anything illegal. I was just playing.
Just for the record. No.
Renato, you sold your company, and then what happened?
By the way,
you
I
don't
should
have a
have
job
sold my
anymore.
company for 2.5 million instead of 1.5.
Yeah. Okay, but you sold your company, and you didn't have a job anymore. And what are you going to do with your life now?
So this was my MBA. I did have a job because I sold my company and I stayed with the company.
Oh, okay.
So I moved from being I became a minority shareholder in the new company. The company that bought my company bought 5 other companies. They were doing a roll-up, right?
Okay.
And I stayed in the company and I was responsible for Latin America. But because I was more entrepreneurial than the other owners of the different companies that were acquired, the CEO took me around, and we had monthly management meetings, not via Zoom, in person in Colorado. I was traveling all the time. I helped set up our Singapore operation, an operation in the Netherlands, 2 companies in the United States. So I was working closely with the leadership of the company, and it was a fantastic experience. During 3 years, it was my MBA. I learned how to build teams. I learned how to open companies abroad in different markets. I learned leadership skills. We had some.
But Renato, I want to stop you here because you already had quite big organizations in Brazil earlier. It had, you mentioned 20, 25 people. That's quite a lot. And when you were managing people and leading people, because now you're saying that the time you're working with these international acquirers was when you learned, but was it challenging for you to get all these skills of like managing people, making sure people did their jobs properly, worked hard? Where did that come from? Or was it those training manuals for Shell saying this is how you...
The training manuals helped a lot. There's some stuff, there are some trainings like situational leadership, and there's, I can't remember right now, but situational leadership is one that comes to mind because it was very impactful for me. Are things that I translated that I use still today, right? But I think that until I managed, until I joined this conglomerate, my leadership was more instinctive. Mm-hmm. And when these investors bought our company, I had a more structured approach. So we had quarterly board meetings where we needed to present metrics that were established by third parties. I didn't have any metrics for my company. And this is one of the things that I was going to say before. Until I sold my company, my metric is, will I make payroll this month? And it was essentially from the first of the month until the 20th, 25th, I was, oh my God, are we going to make payroll? Are we going to make payroll? Are we going to make payroll? Oh, we made payroll. 3 days, 3 nights of good sleep, and then all over again, right?
That sort of explains why you sold your company, though. Actually,
Yes,
think about
absolutely.
It.
I wanted a paycheck. I was so happy to have a paycheck, and it was a good paycheck. My problem anymore.
And actually,
But
sorry, I'll let you finish. Go ahead.
No, and the leadership thing, I think that with this company, I got a more structured approach. So we had a leadership team, and we talked about methodologies and approaches and values and principles. I think these were the 2 big takeaways from those 3 years in this journey. Was we together as leaders in the company's business owners and executives decided what would be the principles of the company and what would be the values. And it's much easier to lead when you can always go back to a basic principle of your organization. And the number 1 principle of our company was think like a client, right? Put yourself in the shoes of the client. How would you react if you received an email like the one that you wrote if you were a client? The other one is hire the best people and let them do their job. So hands off, trust, and things like that were very important. So things that I did instinctively and naturally became more structured,
codified. Yes, and I was going to say that certainly I had this experience in the 90s with my first visit. But how old are you, by the way? You're 56, is that right?
59.
59. So
59.
you look a bit younger than you are. Anyway, so it was discovering as you have this idea of being an entrepreneur, but actually the stresses of making payroll, dealing with all that stuff. Sometimes you discover, well, it's not actually as nice as you think it's going to be until you experience it. And it sounds to me like you discovered that there was a downside to being the leader as well as an upside. That it was quite,
absolutely.
It was quite stressful for you, wasn't it? By the sound of it.
Yes, because one of the things especially when you're a startup, when you're beginning, those people that are with you and believe in you and trust you and follow you, those are very, very important people. They're very valuable because they are part of your struggle, and they are, in a way, they take a little bit of the risk with you, right?
Yes.
They're not entrepreneurs, but they're there. They believe. They see something in you that they believe in, and they're going to follow you. There is this wonderful TED Talk. It's a very short one about
the first
how
follower?
to start a movement.
Yeah, the Derek Sivers, How to Start a Movement.
Yes,
Yes.
how to start a movement. And one of the lessons from that is that the most important person is not the leader, is not the one who starts, is the first follower. Right?
Exactly.
So
by the way, I have to quote this because he says that the first follower is the person who converts the lone nut into a leader, and exactly. I thought I should call my autobiography The Lone Nut.
The Lone Nut, exactly. It's fascinating because you realize that it's absolutely true that those people that were with you in the beginning of your journey, they're probably not the most skilled. They're probably not the top of the market, but they're the ones who are going to grow with you and validate you and trust you. And if you come to them,
actually, Renato,
as I have had to do a few times, they say, "Hey, I your salary will be late, and how much do you need to get through another week?" And they'll stay with you, right? And this is the thing that where you learn compassion, when you learn real leadership, I think, is when you put those people that are making money for you and give them respect and priority, and they see that in you, and they follow.
I mean, it is true, Richard. If we think about some of the conversations we've had on this podcast, this is a recurring theme. We talk about the entrepreneurs, we're focused on the entrepreneurs, but actually the first employees are also somehow, they're entrepreneurial employees. And in fact, some of the people that have been on here have been those kinds of employees as well. They were ready to take a chance not to go with the big firm, but to try to go with something that's starting up. And, they can learn a lot as well.
And if you're successful, if you grow, they are rewarded, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that I didn't say in my journey, because after that I've started 2 other companies, right? And I'm in my hopefully last swan here is the
song. Your swan
song. Yeah, and it's hopefully, but you never know. But the one of the things that happened during the journey that was quite interesting is that, well, I had this big failure, and that was a turnaround, an opportunity to start again. But at one point, Unisys was one of my biggest clients. We were translating a lot of content for Unisys, but Unisys had an internal translation department, and they sent us the overflow. And then Unisys decided that they weren't going to have that department anymore. They were going to shut down the department. And the 2 leaders of the department, the manager and a project manager and a translator that worked there, came to visit us. And they said, oh, we wanted to see how you do this, because Unisys is going to close the department, and we're thinking of starting a translation company to
compete with
their
you.
business. And I said, what? You're coming here for me to teach you how to be my competitor? And I said, why are you going to do that? It's so hard to be an entrepreneur, and so on. So I suggested that we create a joint venture, that we create a separate company where I had all the infrastructure, I had the office, I had the computer, I had everything, I had dictionaries, I had people, and they would be minority partners in this. We would be equal partners in this subsidiary, and eventually, if the business took off, we would merge the 2 companies. And so no money. It was just they would pay up their capital with work.
The revenue they brought in.
The revenue that they generated. And I remember they had to bring, which seemed to be a lot of money, $200,000 in the first year of business. So they actually did. They brought we had discussions, and husbands and parents and everybody involved. We did a big contract. So I had 2 companies, and so they owned 50% of that company, and I had the other company that me and my wife were the owners. And after 2 years, we decided that it didn't make any sense to have 2 companies, and we merged the companies, and they became owners of 30% of the joint company. And my wife and I had 70%, and the 2 of them had 30%. A year goes by, and we looked at these 2 young women as a unit, and one of them was very, very negative. And after 2 years, she decided to quit. She decided to leave, and we looked at the numbers, and I gave her $10,000 for her share in the company. She left the company. It was a period. One of the reasons why she decided to leave was that we weren't growing as much, and we weren't getting paid as much, and she decided to take a job somewhere. So she leaves, and we find out that this other young woman was a wonderful woman. We equated her with the bad partner, and she flourished. And we got one other manager that worked in the company, and we gave him 10% of the company, 5% of the company. So we had 70%. One of them had 25%, and this friend of mine had 5%. 2.5 years go by. We sell our company for $1.5 million. He buys a house.
Right, exactly.
So these people that stayed, that contributed, we created a lot of value for them, right? Mm. And then we had a second exit, because after 3 years, this roll-up was sold to Berlitz, And then my career took a different.
Right.
I moved to
right.
the United States.
That's how
and
you
I
ended up
became an
moving to the
executive.
U.S.
Yeah.
and how you basically started to. Now, what's so interesting for me, Renato, about your whole thing is like because you keep and it's even coming full circle when you were talking about education. But like today, I think it's important for people to know that today Renato is a consultant. Basically, he runs a consulting company that, as I mentioned, that does sort of brokers deals, but also basically is advising owners on how to run their companies. I think it's so funny that all this experience now has made you like the professor, and as you said, you're teaching and you're
I wrote a book.
Sorry, and you're an author. He's author of a very successful book on translation.
Which is essentially goes back to that conversation of the academic.
Yeah, it's behind you. It's the yellow book behind you.
Yes, it's the general theory of the translation company.
Yes.
And it's a book that captures all this experience that I gained through doing it, but also consulting with companies in over 30 countries and learning patterns that exist in the companies and what my business is really about. But the interesting thing about this process is that where is this spark of entrepreneurship? Where does it come from, right? Sometimes it's a little conversation. So I went through this journey. I worked with this private equity firm. I was a minority owner in this business that was sold to Berlitz. I moved to the United States. I became an executive in a publicly traded company in the United States, traveling around the world. It was the biggest translation company in the industry at the time. And after 2 years, I left. I went to another company that it was during the dot-com boom. They doubled my salary, so I went because of money. And then after another year and a half, this other company, Outnet, was acquired by a competitor. And I had an expression that I learned a couple of weeks ago is that I had a garden leave, right? They paid me not to work and not to go to the competition for 6 months. And during 6 months, I'm thinking, I'm looking for jobs. I interviewed, I went to a bunch of places, and I said, I don't want to have a job anymore. I'm an entrepreneur, but what business will I start? And then I remembered a conversation that I had with my boss when I was at Berlitz. The CEO was telling me, well, there are some statistics that say that this industry is worth $30 billion. We are the biggest company in the world, and we make $130 million a year. Where's the rest? Why don't you sell that? I was VP of sales in the company. And I said, this number is wrong, right? And then I realized that my industry didn't have any reliable source of information. It was speculation. Everybody had an opinion. Everybody
it was a black hole. A black
hole. Yeah. So I started Common Sense Advisory, which was my first consulting company, with a partner that came from Forrester, and we started gathering and creating this database of information about the industry.
And that's when we became your client later, because you came and did a workshop for our people about the translation industry, which became part of our new employee onboarding and all the rest of it.
and the interesting part of that is that the opportunity was there. Anybody could have done that, but it wasn't until I had that question. Sometimes it's a question that is going to drive you to find an opportunity and build a business around that opportunity.
And being opportunistic, I want to draw attention that when you talked about the guys from Unisys who came to you and said, teach us how to form a translation company, on the one hand a threat, but you saw how to make it into an opportunity, that there are certain times when the opportunities are there, and it's a mixture of your skill set, your CV, the people you know. It's not like everyone is in a perfect place to take it, but there were particular times when you saw an opportunity, but then you took action, right? You didn't just sit there thinking about it, you did it, right?
And it was driven by fear, essentially.
Fear. Okay.
What's fascinating to me,
These guys
Renato,
are going
about
to be my competitor.
yeah, what fascinated me though about the common sense and just basically the shift into, I call it market research or consulting. That's just a different business. I mean, like, what made you, like, you talked about, you had all this education through like your basically business experience, but what on earth said, I'm going to try something because that requires certain, there's certain protocols and ways that you sell and things that you produce. You hadn't done any of that before.
There's another lesson in this story, which I told it in a certain way. Your business, in my experience, my business always turns out to be completely different from what I thought it was going to be in the beginning.
Okay.
Right? So I thought that I was going to have a typing service near the courthouse, and I became a translation company. When I started Common Sense Advisory, my proposition, I remembered this clearly. I was driving, I visited a company in Italy. I was driving from Bologna to Milan in the highway, beautiful full moon. I stopped the car. I'm looking at the moon, and I'm thinking, why am I looking for a job? Let me call. This was after the dot-com bust. There was a lot of people unemployed in the market. Let me call some people that I know and discuss this idea of starting a consulting company. I had worked as a consultant at Arthur Andersen, but I didn't know the model very well. And I called colleagues from Berlitz. I called other people that I knew from the industry in conferences. And I ended up talking to Don De Palma, who was working at Idiom, which was a software company at the time. And he said, oh, I wrote a book and I was thinking of starting a business. I already own a brand called Common Sense Advisory. I say, oh, I love the name. We scheduled a meeting. 3 days later, I take a train from New York to Boston. We meet and we have a conversation. We start a business, and I'm going to the market trying to sell consulting services. And there's no demand for consulting services in 2002. Nobody wanted to buy consulting at the time. And especially in the translation industry, where there was no habit for that.
Right. There's no history or culture of it.
And a lot of the clients are quite small, and consulting goes with other big companies, right?
Exactly. And then, but we reached out to buyers, right? And then much later, I would find out that translation is not something that is a priority. It's not a C-level discussion. It's a completely separate story. But the story there was that after about 3 or 4 months that we didn't get any clients, we sent proposals, but nobody was signing up. We decided to publish research, syndicated research. And so we started interviewing, and over time I realized that interviewing clients is the best way for you to, interviewing potential clients is the best way for you to sell, because you let them talk. So we interviewed 75 companies. We wrote this beautiful report that I think it's seminal. It's called The Beggars at the Globalization Banquet. There's a lot of stuff that we learned about the industry in that very, very long report. And we went into this syndicated research business. I found some 10 clients that were willing to invest $5,000 in us for us to be our seed investment. And that's how we started, right? So we'll say, let's have recurring revenue from the syndicated research and memberships. And then we get money from consulting, and the business grew. My partner was not very entrepreneurial. So it took me like 5 years to reach 15 employees. And Nimdzi, my current company, we have been in business for 3 years, and I already have 27 employees working in the company.
And this is a similar business.
It was similar. Again, when I started Nimdzi, I thought we're going to make Common Sense Advisory better.
What happened to Common Sense Advisory? Did you sell it?
They're great, excellent research organization. They have their style. We have a different style. So my business today is very different from what I thought it was going to be in the beginning. So this investment thesis, right? My thesis was that I was going to be a competitor to Common Sense Advisory. We seldom compete with them. This industry has grown a lot, but we publish market research, but it's a different style. We do M&A consulting. We work with technology consulting. We help large corporations. We did a transformation project for IBM, which it's more of a management consulting business than a localization or technology-based business. We help them rethink their business structure. So the business becomes the talent that you acquire. So our team today defines what clients they're going to go after, what business they're going to sell. We're going into training, and we call it Nimdzi learning, so e-learning for our clients and things like that. And it's all initiatives from the people in the organization. So I took a back seat, and I'm more of a coach, internal consultant, product than an executive in the company, because I learned how to delegate.
Renato, I want to ask you something that, again, it's only because I know you, but I think it's an interesting part of your personality. I've always found you to be a first adopter. But I don't know how much this is part of being an entrepreneur or not, but like Renato's always the first one to try something new. Like you're probably like the first one on Clubhouse. Like you're probably the first localization person on Clubhouse or whatever, like, cause that's the latest thing. But like, is there like, what is that about? Like, is it, first of all, it's true, right? You're like the first.
It is. I'm an early adopter. I totally jump on. I like to check. It's like food. I think that one of the lessons, and I find myself thinking about my father a lot recently, because I had this conversation with my kids the other day. It's like, you cannot say that you don't like some food before you try, right? You say, oh, I don't want to eat it. Try it. If you don't want to eat it after you tried it, it's fine. I will accept it. But just because the looks are bad, you don't want to try it, it's not acceptable. Right? That's what my father would do. And I think that with ideas, technologies, new trends, and things like that, it's important to be an early adopter.
It's adventurous. I mean, I think there's a bit of entrepreneurship that's adventure. You're an adventurous person. I would, right?
Yeah, and an important part of this conversation, Kimon, is you fail a lot, right? There is a lot of failure in being an early adopter, and if you ask me about regrets in the business, my biggest regret was that when the internet came to Brazil, I was the 13th company in the whole country to have a dedicated internet connection. I had a Class C address, which was, I had an IP address that was the whole number, 255, 255, 255, from 0 to 255. I could sell internet access. I actually started an internet company, but I didn't understand the business model, and I gave up because it was complicated. I needed telephone lines, and I didn't have the money to buy the telephone lines that needed to be bought at the time. It wasn't a service, it was an asset in Brazil. And I could have been a billionaire because I had access to the internet before all the billionaires internet billionaires in Brazil. It was the Brazilian National Bank, the Brazilian Investment Bank, Coca-Cola, all the big corporations.
And Renato Beninatto.
And Lazowski Beninatto, which was the name of my company. My contract with the telecom company was contract number 13, 000013, right?
But there's a lesson to jump in, which is, I mean, of course, clearly, early adopter looking into new things, but curiosity in how things work, how you can do things better, faster, cheaper, lower your costs. This is the entrepreneurial mindset. If something surprises you, why? Try to understand what. If something makes you angry, why? And I noticed speed a couple of times. You talked about being the fastest typing service. You want to do something fast. Something else you mentioned, could you do all those books in a certain amount of time? You obviously figured out that maybe you're not a very patient person. You figured out that maybe there are other people out there who aren't so patient, and they will pay extra.
Well, time is money, right? Time is money. It's an old saying.
It's also our lives, right?